Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this last ESF Insight conversation for 2021. I'm Susan McKenzie. Many of you know me, but there's a lot of international people and people from around the state who don't know me. I'm the CEO at the Emergency Services Foundation. I'd like to begin this morning by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the country throughout Victoria and recognise their continuing connection to land, waters and communities, and pay my respects to elders past and present. So this is being recorded, and as usual, we welcome your questions. So please put your questions in the chat box down the bottom, a little chat icon, and I'll facilitate those a little bit later. So today we're joined by three students from Worcester Polytech Institute in Massachusetts in the USA. I've never been to Worcester, although I've been working with people from Worcester for many years, but I'm told it's around 60 kilometres from Boston. I have been to Boston a few times. WPI, as we call it, was founded in 1865 as one of the United States' first engineering and technology universities. In fact, the three students that are joining us today that have worked with ESF, just admitting some people, have been working with ESF. They're all STEM students. So we've got Sarah Homsey, Casey Paris, and Owen Fannenstahl. Not only did they have to adjust to the disappointment of not travelling to Melbourne to cuddle a koala and see Sydney Harbour, but they found themselves working some crazy hours to conduct interviews with people on the other side of the world via Zoom. And to understand how emergency service work impacts on family life. So welcome, Sarah, Casey and Owen. Thank you for joining us. So first of all, Sarah, can you just tell everyone, I've said you're a STEM student, what are you actually studying?
I'm studying mechanical engineering, hoping to work in prosthetics.
Okay, and Casey, what about you?
I'm studying biomedical engineering. I'm hoping to work with medical devices.
And Owen?
I'm studying robotics engineering and I'm hoping to graduate.
Is that all? Nothing further?
Well, hopefully something after that, but I'm just focusing on the small steps.
Okay, good for you. Okay, so the point I'm trying to make there is that these students are working in a field that's very, very different to what they've been doing with us in this work. So, Owen, perhaps you tell us how come three students from Massachusetts, WPI, are working with ESF?
Of course. Well, we're all third-year students at this university, and here at WPI, once you hit your third year, you get to work on a project, usually abroad internationally, and it takes up about 2/3 of your work for that semester, where you just focus in on that one project to really get some global experience and also just learn about what it's like to work in a group setting on a long-term project and to try and execute and manage those things in large parts unsupervised by yourself. So we all applied for the Melbourne Project Center and got in, and we got to work on this wonderful project here with ESF, and that's the short version.
Okay, thank you. Well, I know that WPI have got 42 project centres around the world where their students go to, which is just unbelievable, the experience that this university provides its students and the different sort of learning they're provided. So I think that's fantastic. So I'm going to hand over now to Sarah, Casey and Owen to tell us about what they found on this study of the impact on families of emergency service work. So over to you.
All right. Thank you, Susan, for that introduction.
I'm just sharing my screen right now.
All right. So first we would, one second. I set Zoom to be on top. First, we would like to begin today by saying that WPI also acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia, especially the Boon Wurrung and Wurundjeri peoples in the Melbourne area and their connections to land, water, and community. We pay our respects to their elders past, present, and emerging, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders peoples today, as well as extend our respect to the Nipmuc people of Massachusetts. Hello and welcome to our presentation. I'm Owen Fandensteel.
I'm Sarah Holmesy.
And I'm Casey Paris.
And our project, The Impacts of Emergency Service Work on Family Life, has been examining the lives of families of emergency service workers through research and interviews in order to better understand their experiences and needs. This project is sponsored by the Emergency Services Foundation in conjunction with the Worcester Polytechnic Institute's Melbourne Project Center.
Emergency service workers are a critical part of society and sacrifice so much to serve their community. They do work that is highly visible and often stressful. What is not clear is the secondary impacts this work can have on their families, and the families are not seen by the public eye like the workers, and their struggles and successes are not acknowledged. This is a powerful quote from a police officer's wife that we interviewed during our study. Every single day, a police officer puts on their coat and they are going out to war. No one understands what the partners really have to go through. Emergency service workers are all exposed to a lot of traumatic events, which can have a negative impact on their life. This can also have secondhand effects on their families. When their families are struggling, it can lead to the worker not performing their best on the job, which creates a cycle. The Bushfire and Natural Hazard Cooperative Research Center claims that only 1 in 5 first responders seek and receive adequate help for a mental health condition. When emergency service workers don't seek help, their families and friends and colleagues are the people left to help support them when they're undiagnosed and untreated for mental health. The lives of the families of ESWs are very different from the lives of an average civilian family. Their schedules are moved around often, and multiple mental health challenges can arise, which can lead to secondary effects, which are mentioned later on.
So our project's overarching goal was to understand the experiences and needs of families of emergency service workers and how they support those workers and how to help share those understandings.
For our project, we developed 4 main objectives. The first one was to understand how emergency service work affects family life either positively or negatively. The second one takes a deeper dive to understand what the families need in order to be supported and to help support the workers themselves. We accomplished this by interviewing and talking with the families. Once this information was collected, a photo story was created to illustrate the family's perspectives and experiences. And lastly, our 4th objective was to craft recommendations for changes to existing support systems and resources that could be added. We used background information we researched and also asked the families what they would like to see implemented to help benefit them.
So we began our project by combing through previous research conducted on emergency service workers and their families. And while we found plenty of research on the impacts that emergency service work, both positive and negative, can have on the worker, we found very little research on how families were impacted. We even at one point found a comprehensive study that looked at over 2,000 other independent studies related to the well-being of emergency service workers. And one of its main findings was that virtually no studies could be found on the well-being of families. The closest thing we could find was the information on the importance of having a strong familial and social network for well-being, but not on the families themselves. So we instead looked a lot at parallel scenarios such as military families and families that serve as informal caretakers to help give us a basis from which to begin the interviewing process.
We conducted all of our interviews through Zoom, which I'm sure all of us now are comfortable with at this point. We created a social media post explaining what we hope to do and to gain more interviewees. We were fortunate enough to interview 25 family members, and we just wanted to thank them all right now for being so brave to welcome us in and to share their personal stories with us. I'm pretty sure it was really hard for most of y'all, so thank you so much. Our interview included us asking questions about their own health and their workers' health and the positive and negative aspects that have come from their lives being a family member of an emergency service worker. We also asked how they might have felt or feel about having an emergency service worker in their life. And lastly, we asked about the support systems that the family use and if there is anything missing that they need for support. We collected stories and anecdotes from people we interviewed. Many of the interviewees were also emergency service workers themselves, and the majority of the interviewees had friends or family spanning multiple sectors of emergency services. That is why you see a lot more than 25 people on the chart. The majority were in fire, specifically the Country Fire Authority, CFA, followed by police, state emergency services, SES, and ambulance. Emergency service work can impact families in many positive ways.
Although the negatives are inevitable, almost every family member expressed some type of positive impact they felt for having an emergency service worker in their family. Displayed on the screen are the findings that were the most common feelings that the family shared. The one we heard the most was them having a sense of pride and inspiration. As you can see in the chart, about 19 of the 25 family members felt this way. The families also tended to have a greater appreciation and respect for emergency service workers in the work that they do. The service work that a family member performs often inspires others around them to work or volunteer in emergency service systems as well. Nearly every interviewee we spoke to either had a parent or relative in emergency service work. Some even had generations of family members within the departments because their parents, grandparents, or relatives' work inspired them. Here is a powerful quote from the son of a CFA member we were fortunate enough to talk to. He shared with us how, although at times it seems like they are putting their life on the line, people do appreciate it. You should take pride that someone in your family is strong and brave enough to put their family life on hold to save people that they don't know. There are many lessons that the family members have learned from their emergency service worker, such as leadership training, resilience, time and crisis management skills, and there were so many others that we heard as well. One expressed how they have a better perspective on the world and that it opened their eyes to a lot of things a normal teenager wouldn't be exposed to. They explained how it puts a safety net around them and that having parents as police officers has prepared them to get out there and be self-dependent. Families mentioned that they have met other families through their emergency service workers' social networks, such as Facebook groups or events they've attended with their partner. Some families felt that they engaged with their community more often and in more meaningful ways because they see the positive impacts that their family member makes in the community. Families also mentioned that their workers' work changed their perspective on the community and world itself. One described it as seeing it through a new lens. This included understanding the impacts of natural disasters that they have on the communities, the importance of volunteer work, and understanding that the wide variety of socioeconomic backgrounds of people within their community come from and the challenges that they present. Overall, this awareness strengthened their bonds with their own family member and other communities. It also elevated their understandings of the situations their workers face. And so lastly, nearly every family member that their emergency service worker said that they absolutely love what they do and that their work doesn't feel like a real job to them because they have so much passion for what they do every day. So a husband of a CFA worker that we talked to said how if your partner is happy with what they are doing, it will eventually improve your life as well. This is a common theme throughout many of the interviews when we asked them if their partner's work ever positively impacted their family life. However, emergency service work can also have many negative impacts on workers as well as their families.
While every family's experience is different, there were a lot of commonalities in our negative findings. The most common one was the time commitments that emergency service work demanded, whether it's volunteer work taking up hours on top of a full-time job, or the unpredictable and often frustrating rostering system that police and ambulance and other paid workers experience. In a similar vein, many interviewees feel worried for the emergency service worker when they are on call out of fear for their safety and are frustrated when they have to leave and miss events because they get called out. A lot of interviewees were stressed because they felt responsible for taking care of the health and well-being of the worker, but were often unprepared or ill-equipped to help. Finally, many interviewees said that the workers' professions often prohibited them from certain areas in their social lives. Between every profession, the most common negative feedback we heard was related to time commitments, although the specifics varied between professions. For families of volunteer workers, the biggest negative was how doing volunteer hours on top of a full-time job left very little time for them to spend with their family. As for the families of full-time workers, some of the most common feedback was how the unpredictable rostering system could have a huge toll on the family and the workers' availability. One police spouse said that the officer would be scheduled for different shift times every day of the week, ranging from morning at the start of the week to late into the night, even early to the morning, all the way back around by the end of the week, making it very difficult to make family plans. We also heard that the commutes for certain jobs could be incredibly long, as they often don't get to pick where they're stationed. One paramedic family mentioned they live on a FIFO, or fly-in, fly-out schedule, where the worker would be flown by plane to work their job for 4 days a week and then fly back to spend 3 with their family. We also heard a lot of stories about how workers being on call could affect families, as nearly every family with a worker who has ever worked any type of volunteer work that involved them being on call had numerous stories of how it would go off at the worst times: birthdays, family events, the middle of the night, etc. Emergency service work can also be stressful and dangerous even, which leads many families to worry about the physical and mental health of the worker. Many CFA families said that they are often worried for the safety of the worker when they respond to a fire, and many of them could each recall a specific bush fire that turned up on the news that had them and even their kids extremely worried for the worker's safety. Police families also mentioned that they feel worried for the officer's safety due to the dangerous nature of their work. Emergency service work can also be dangerous for mental health. One interviewee, whose partner and brother were both involved with police, described PTSD as an inevitability within the police force, saying that you either retire early or you get ill health retired by mental trauma. The added stresses that come with emergency service work often leads families to feel an added sense of responsibility for keeping track of the worker's mental health.
Nearly every interviewee mentioned that their emergency service workers suffered stress from their work and that they felt responsible for helping ease the stress and expressing frustration at how difficult it is to try and to monitor their partner's moods and handle those responsibilities. A daughter of a police officer claimed that she couldn't help her mother and didn't know how she could help fix her, which made her feel really guilty and really anxious. Another family member said they didn't know how to recognize the signs of PTSD until it was problematic, while another didn't know how to take advantage of the support services, so they struggled alone. The son of a police officer shared a story of when he was about 6 years old, sitting in the car with his mom who had PTSD and was crying. Since he was so young and wasn't educated on how to help her or how to recognize the signs of PTSD and anxiety, he felt guilty just staring at his mom, his crying mother, not really knowing what to do. A partner of an emergency service worker with PTSD talked about how her 6-year-old daughter dropped a fork in the kitchen in front of her dad. Her immediate reaction was, "Sorry, Dad, I'm sorry, I didn't mean, I'm really sorry, Dad, I'm sorry, Dad, I'm really sorry." Like, that's not a typical reaction for a little girl, but she had to recognize and realize that her father can't handle loud noises right next to him. And she had to learn that by living through the experiences. Some interviewees claim that their social life has taken a toll or isn't really what a civilian social life is like. Nowadays, having a police officer in the family can make it hard for communities to trust or like them because of all the COVID protests. Spouses have said that they look at some people and are confused as to why they won't accept help from from people like their partners. Children claim that because the parents are emergency service workers, They would not be invited to some things because what they would be doing might be illegal, for example, underage drinking. We've heard circumstances where people don't get invited to some things because they knew being on call might be a disturbance. And shift work and being on call would also naturally impact a person's ability to join teams and clubs. Several partners have claimed that because of emergency services work jaded view on the world, it is harder for them to make friends and have them trust people. One of our interviewees noted the discrepancy between her and her partner's ability to trust people. She felt like she could trust someone right away and would need a reason not to trust them, where her partner is the opposite. He does not trust at first sight and needs a reason to trust them.
So when partners do go to seek help, the help is either usually referred to the sector and thus more geared towards helping the worker rather than the family, or sought independently, and thus those professionals can struggle to understand what the family members of emergency service work go through. There are a few resources dedicated to the family through some sector networks, such as mental health professionals that can help the families of police, but they tend to be few and far between or not well known. Many of the families interviewed who use these resources also said that they seemed far too focused on the health and problems of the worker, even though they were approaching them to discuss their own health and problems. We also found some interesting commonalities throughout our interviews when it came to families helping workers. We noticed that when the partner of an emergency service worker was also in emergency services themselves, they were far more likely to discuss their problems with each other as they had a higher level of understanding of what the partner was going through. They were also much less likely to be stressed out by their partner's work and things like rostering or being on call because they had experienced a similar work-life balance. One of the most important things we noticed in our interviews was how families who mentioned that they communicated about stresses said that it was very helpful as it allowed them to help their workers through it. We also noticed that there were generally two ways that families saw their workers deal with stress. The first is that some workers would prefer to not think about stressful things at home and compartmentalize their stress so they could relax at home. This would lead to them not wanting to discuss their stresses with their partners and often prefer to discuss them at work or out with their coworkers in order to maintain this divide and this barrier of intimacy, although this would often make the family feel excluded and worried about the worker's health because it's just a mystery to them. The other way was to share their stresses with their partners so as to get things off their chest and to share the burden, although this meant that they would often worry about their stresses around the clock. There really is no right answer when it comes to finding ways to deal with stress or communicate with your partner, but it was a really interesting and surprisingly even divide that we noticed throughout our interviews.
While talking with the families, it was easy to see the strong emotions they were feeling. This was one of the quotes that stuck out, expressing their negative feelings. I remember being frustrated as hell at family functions, Christmases, birthdays, any special time that I had driven over an hour to see my mom, and she would rush out the door when the pager went off, leaving us all there without her. I hated it. I felt like it was more important than we were. So after conducting all of our interviews, we compiled audio clips and photos together to make this engaging video, which I will play for you now. We hope this will be a useful tool for ESF to use for raising awareness about the families of emergency service workers. If I did this correctly, we will have audio.
Enormously inspired and proud by my old man.
I'm just enormously proud and grateful for what our emergency services people do. And maybe, and I'm sorry I'm emotional, but I think it's maybe because when you're living with it, you get to understand the enormity of it.
So yeah, I have so much respect for my parents because, they put their lives on the line every single day. They don't know each day is different in the police force. So, they don't know what they're going to come into contact with. So yeah, 100%, I'm so proud of my parents. I have a much better perspective on the world. That a good positive, we're self-dependent and self-reliant a lot.
definitely. Yeah, definitely. I do feel very responsible on keeping an eye on his mental health and his health. And, you know, and also his parents do as well. Like his parents will always be on the phone to me saying, look after him, look after him. So I have this whole big burden that I'm the one who has to, you know, do it all. But you can only do what you can do.
It's almost like I vicariously had the emotions that mum was facing. You know, if she's upset, of course I'm going to be upset because, you know, and obviously I couldn't help her. So of course, yeah, that played a massive part. I couldn't help her. You know, I couldn't fix her, if that makes sense. So, you know, that made me feel really guilty about myself and really anxious, and, you know.
But I think in those situations when I was so young and when it was happening, I just didn't know what to do because I wasn't educated on what I needed to do to help mum.
Definite changes with him, but I didn't know what to look for. And so then all of a sudden it was him pulling me aside to say, I need you to know that I've been having suicidal ideations and I'm not in a good place. And so that was just like another slap in the face when I thought we'd gotten to a good spot where, yeah, like in hindsight, oh yeah, he was binge eating and he was, you know, not exercising anymore. And
there was a storm, or if they needed to have a search or something like that go on, he would, you know, just disappear for a few days, and there'd be no support whatsoever. There was never any support there for me.
You know, they're putting their lives on the line every single day. It's like, you know, are we going to see them tonight? All that sort of stuff. So yeah, it's pretty confronting.
So, you know, those long periods where he was away, just, you know, fires that burn for weeks on end. You know, when you just not see much of him, that was the stressful time. You know, he's out there.
So there's like an aspect of me that didn't sleep for a whole week because I was worried about Dad being away.
families need to know what to look for because we're the ones that are with them at home and we're the ones that see the fallout. But if you don't know what you're looking for, you don't know if they've just had a bad day or if it's when one bad day turns into 2 bad days and 3 bad days.
We won't get included in some sort of things because, you know, they'll do things that probably won't be legal as such. But we don't get invited to a lot of things. So it puts our social lives in sort of a different way.
I remember being frustrated as hell at any family functions, Christmas, birthdays, any special time that I'd driven over an hour to see my mum, and she would rush out the door when the pager went off, leaving us all there without her. I hated it. I felt like it was more important than we were.
All right, that video will soon be available on the ESF website. If any of you know anyone that you think could benefit from watching it or that you'd like to share it with. In the meantime, we heard a lot of great feedback from our interviewees on what could be changed and have narrowed down our recommendations for changes families could see in their support systems to help them more. First, lots of interviewees said that they wish there were resources out there aimed at them. While it's true that some resources do exist, this feedback was common enough that it was very clear that the resources currently out there are just not reaching families. whether it's things like advice on how to live with an emergency service worker to access to professional counseling with experience in these areas. Our second recommendation feeds into that, which is to expand the ways in which helpful information can reach families by providing more avenues for educating families on topics. Many families repeatedly said that they wish they even had so much as a brochure on things like how to look for and recognize the signs of PTSD, or how to help somebody living with it. As while the worker may have received support for themselves individually through the sector, they had to learn all those things on their own the hard way. Our third recommendation is that more groups take strides to improve the visibility of the successes and struggles that families face, so more people can understand their experiences and the importance of supporting them. One interviewee mentioned that at a police banquet, she was rudely told to be quiet for a very short comment, simply toasting the wife of an officer after 30 years in the force. The families put in hard work to maintain these relationships and support these workers, but are often unseen and unappreciated, and sometimes, as in this case, even put down for trying to raise awareness. Our final recommendation is that there needs to be more resources aimed at children of emergency service workers, as few exist, and some interviewees said that they couldn't find any child psychologists through the network shared with them by the mental health professionals within the sector, even when they needed those resources desperately.
Thank you all for coming and listening. We would just like to thank our sponsor and advisor for this great semester. It was an amazing experience, and I know we all learned a lot and enjoyed the process. Now, I would like to open up the floor for any questions you all might have.
So thank you very much, Sarah, Casey and Owen. I mean, I've seen that video as it's developed, and I still get tears in my eyes watching it. It's incredibly powerful, and I'm going to have great pleasure in sharing it with all the heads of agency very soon. We've got Tony Pearce with us today, and I've asked him to unmute. Tony is our chair, and Tony is the Inspector General for Emergency Management. And I saw that he put a question in the chat, so I'll get Tony to ask his question himself.
Yeah, thanks, Susan, and Owen, Sarah, and Casey. Thanks for that great work. And I just want to firstly just thank you for the work you've done. It's a really important area, and it is certainly one that we right across our sector we haven't looked at in any great detail in the past at all. So everything you've done, I can guarantee you, will be of value to us moving forward. So thanks so much for that. I think you partly answered the question towards the very back end of your slides there, but what I was interested in was recognising that mental health injury is prevalent in our sector, and we know the impact that has. I was wondering that in amongst the discussions about family members' concerns for their family member who's a worker as well as their own mental health situation, was there any sense at all of an overall satisfaction or even a lack of satisfaction about the support that's out there, or even their knowledge of what support's available to them as families and to their partners who are working?
I can answer this.
Yeah.
So we got a lot of different responses. We asked a lot of people if they had used these resources, and most of the interviewees had not taken advantage of those resources, even when the worker had gone through mental health challenges. And we, of the people who said that they did not, we asked if, hypothetically, if something were to happen tomorrow, would you know who to call or who to talk to or where to look? And most of the people said no. There was a good number that said yes, but most of the people who said yes were also emergency service workers themselves, and said that they personally would just go through their own sector and not their partner's sector. So that's sort of a loophole, I guess, in the question. But I think overall we heard that a lot of people didn't know where to go. Although we did hear from some of the younger interviewees that they would simply just try and Google their questions and try and find their way to anything online about their sector or their station. So I think that's a good start, but it definitely was not pervasive knowledge.
If I can add something to that.
Sure.
So I also know that some people have had support from outside, like from before anything has happened. We've heard that people have psychologists from like previously in their lives, and just like stuff for outside of emergency services workers, emergency service work. They've also had, I've heard like from young interviewees where they've used support systems that they know from the sector, but it wouldn't be because of emergency service work. It would be some sort of reason outside of because their family's an emergency service worker, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So
Terrific, thank you.
thanks, Tony. There's a question here from Sarah who said, aside from more information and access to psychologists, did you find the participants had other ideas about how to give better support to families? For example, social support groups. Did any of them mention that?
I don't think they mentioned specifically support groups, but I think it was just like access to information, or just like putting it out there that there is something for families, because it was just very hard for them to get the information or get the fact that there is something out there for them, because they just wouldn't know. They just wouldn't know that there's something there out there for them.
Yeah, and if I can add to that, one person did also suggest that they mentioned that they had seen that police has sort of their own magazine to talk about their events and their issues, and they highlight their successes and struggles within the police workers through that publication. And that interview suggested that maybe something similar could exist for families, just to help other families realize that, you know, they're not alone. There are lots of common experiences out there, both positive and negative, and to help them better access resources and just, you know, help people understand what these families go through. And even if a full-time magazine, that might necessarily be feasible. I'm not sure exactly about the resources that are available at the sector level, but potentially things like op-ed pieces or you know, just articles within those existing publications that exist for these emergency service sectors on the families and their experiences. That alone could just be a huge step.
What you're really talking about, Owen, is what we refer to as lived experience. So it's about storytelling and lived experience. It's so important. And that actually leads on quite well to the next question from Amanda, who says, did you get any insight about how we could distribute information to family members?
Yeah,
There's always complaints, you know, where it doesn't get fed down. If you think about CFA with 50,000 people, it's a lot of people to distribute to. So did they give you any insight?
We didn't get a whole lot of insight beyond that as to how to spread information, but some people who said that they had heard of these resources said that a lot of the time that they had heard them either through their own personal sector when they were part of when they were also an emergency service worker, or that they had found out about them through just through online resources. I know we spoke to some agency managers who mentioned that they were working on a lot of online resources and other specific to the sector, as well as we'd heard a lot about non-sector specific resources, such as, I believe, Beyond Blue is a very well-known website that people mentioned several times in other interviews that had helpful resources. So just finding, I think, more avenues and taking advantage of the technology there, such as like the social media channels that ESF and similar organizations have, or you know, sharing information about common Facebook groups for these families of specific stations or sectors. Things like that could be used as ways to try and maybe spread the information out more. But as for what we heard directly from families, we did not hear a lot about specific recommendations to improve that.
How to reach them, okay. There's a nice comment there from Catherine Greaves, who's the CEO at Life Saving Victoria. Such a powerful message illustrating both the dedication and heartfelt pride in our emergency service workers, but also highlighting the less understood and significant impacts that this dedicated service has on families and their loved ones. That's really important. Sarah Hewitt has got a question. She was also interested in your finding around family members being treated differently by their community. For example, the child of the police who doesn't get invited to parties. Could you tell us anything more about this? You know, of course, it's a sort of stigma that they face.
Yeah, I can talk about this. We talked with, I think, a couple of children usually of
They were
of
adults, but they
emergency
had
service
been
workers.
children of emergency
Yes,
service workers.
they're the child of emergency service workers. They're not children; they're above 18. But they had expressed how, like, being part of, it was mostly police officers. So being part of a family with a police officer kind of held this stigma around, oh, they can't be invited here because I'm gonna get in trouble, or they can't know that we're doing this because of their parents. We also heard, we also did a lot of research where the children would kind of assume that this child of a police officer would be a goody two shoes, or I don't know if you know that term in Australia, but they would be sort of a perfect child, so that they would make fun of them or just hold them on that stigma. And then because this child would be like so suffocated with that stigma, that they would act out, and they would act as a bad child around their parents, around the school, around the community in general. And we would see that, we heard that there was a stigma, a social stigma, and these interviewees kind of proved it to us.
Mm-hmm. And if I can throw one thing on there at the end, sometimes, I mean, the impacts can vary greatly. Like, it can be something as small as, like, if your father is on call for CFA, then he can't go and run the Little League, because if he can go on call at any time, then he can't be relied on to go and run these games, to things as intense as we heard from some interviewees. I think one in particular, they mentioned that as a family of a police officer, one of like just 2 or 3 police officers in a small town, they were, kind of notorious there for that. And they'd even gotten things like people banging on the door of the family home late at night asking for the officer, or people yelling in their yard, or sending the family death threats even. So the impacts can really just vary just so much.
Thanks, Owen. I noticed there was a comment there about DELP and EAP, and EAP is really, our go-to place. But there's actually been a piece of research that's come out very recently on after the fires, and it talks about where they interviewed people who were volunteer firefighters after the Black Summer fires. And EAP is, interestingly for them, sort of not their first choice of where they want to go, because they feel that they're not understood by those people, which was what you found as well, that the families felt that when they were given those sort of places to go to, they weren't well understood. So I think that's something that we need to look at more carefully. There's a question here from Vaughan saying this is really valuable work. Apologies if I missed the start, but I was curious if this work also included family of relief and recovery workers. First responders face incredible challenges, but so does the relief community. They absolutely do, Vaughan, but in this instance, we didn't speak to relief and recovery workers, but we are very, very conscious of what you're saying. And this is really a preliminary study, like a lot of the work that WPI does for us. It's a preliminary study to get us thinking, and then we go on and do other work that perhaps is a little bit more comprehensive. There's no more questions. I'm just going to ask each of the students. Casey, what's a big learning from you that you got out of this project? What's a golden nugget that you took away?
Let's see. Well, I thought it was very interesting learning, because I never realized what the families go through, or even police, fire. They're also relevant in our lives, but I never really thought about how their families are impacted, or even that they can suffer from things like PTSD and all mental health issues.
We just sort of take them for granted as community members. We take it for granted, but we don't think about what the impact is.
Yeah.
Yeah. What about you, Sarah?
I would definitely agree with what Casey said. We obviously everywhere around us, everywhere in the world, we all have first responders, and I can't say that I have realized that they go through a lot of this stuff, and this has really opened my eyes to seeing that. I also got a really big taste of what Australia is like, which is a great thing because I really wanted to go there. And I loved hearing everyone's accents and stuff, but it was really, really nice and powerful to hear all of these stories of what families go through. And a lot of the people were emotional and were just so brave enough to share their stories with us, and it was very impactful. And I think that it will eventually help me to share my stories of what I've been going through, even though I'm not a family member of an emergency service worker, but just having the courage to share is just a huge thing for me in my life. So yeah, that would be a really big thing that I would take away from this.
And what about you, Owen?
I mean, I think for me personally, I came into this project knowing almost nothing about emergency services and the work that goes into it. All I knew was that my uncle is a volunteer firefighter, but part of that is because he's a pyromaniac and he loves watching fires. So I didn't really know a whole lot, but I just got to learn so much about those experiences of these families for this project, and the stories, they were all just so powerful. That was definitely, I think, what I learned the most about was just these experiences, and both like this, the struggles and the successes that these people go through, they're all just so profound. And it's like this whole side of the world that I've always been like near, but never seen myself.
I remember while I was online with you for the first interview, and at the end of it, we were all just sort of gobsmacked, weren't we? We were just silent, thinking, oh my God, and I wondered whether I'd done the right thing asking you to do this project. But I think you adapted very well and you coped. And did you get a sense that people speaking to you, was that actually sort of cathartic for them to actually talk about this? Did you get a sense of that, Casey?
Yeah, definitely. I feel like even some were like sharing stories that like they were like, oh, like my relative like has never even like heard this story and stuff. So they really like opened up, and them talking, like it felt like it was almost like therapy for them. Like, yeah.
Yeah, it was really interesting or you can go, Sarah.
Sorry. I was just going to say that you can hear in the video that people started crying during our interviews with us, and for them, we are complete strangers. So for them to really have this emotion during an interview with three complete strangers shows kind of how important it is to them, how their family members work and what they do for their lives and stuff. So I would say is definitely powerful.
Susan, if I could just add to that, I had two family members who participated, one on one of my siblings' side and one who's a direct relation, obviously, to me personally. And it actually gave us the opportunity to surprisingly talk about more things we've probably spoken about in many years in the lead up to the interviews.
Yeah, so that's really beneficial too. Look, there's some nice comments there on the side to you from some of the participants. So we will take note of those. I think that, you've done a fantastic job, and I'm really proud of what you've done. Yeah. And I'm going to be proud to share what you've done. And there was a comment there from Michelle Young, who's one of the senior people at Fire Rescue Victoria, and she said she's looking forward to sharing that video with her colleagues in there. So I think that it will get widespread use, and we are still using work today from the WPI students did a couple of years ago. I'll be referring to it at a meeting on Thursday. So it is really meaningful and helpful work for us. So thank you very much, Sarah, Casey and Owen. I think we've really opened many people's eyes with what you've presented, because as Tony said, this is not a conversation that's been had in the sector up to this point, and it needs to be had, because, you know, when we sign up somebody, whether they're an employee or a volunteer in emergency services, they essentially get signed up their partner as well. And I know that, you know, the profound effect that had on me personally. You know, I remember being called at 6 o'clock in the morning and my husband saying to the person on the other end of the line, you know, you'll find her at work. And this was at the time when it is, you know, there was something big going on. It affects families profoundly. And I would like to say thank you to the people who spoke with the students. You know, you didn't know me, you didn't know them. They were these strangers from across the other side of the world, and you were fantastic. So thank you very much. You've made a huge contribution to our knowledge. Thank you also to Professors Lorraine and Steve from WPI for their guidance on the ground throughout the project. That's been fantastic. And we've had a long and good relationship with WPI, and I look forward to another project next year. A recording of this presentation will be on the website in the coming days, and all related documents. So I wish you all well for the coming festive season. Stay safe. Hope you can join us again in 2022, when ESF will present very many more interesting insights of relevance to the sector. So go well, go safe, and thank you all very much for joining us today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, lots of claps.
There's
That's
also
nice.
there's also one last question off on the side from Charles.
Yeah,
Says,
sure.
was there a desire for a greater connection to the team, crew, or leaders of the family member? Casey or Sarah, do you want to answer this, or?
Not. Can you repeat the question?
I think this is Charles at Victoria Police. Was there a desire for greater connection to the team, crew, leaders of their family members? So I think he's talking about work team groups.
Like, did the family want to meet like the workers, like co-workers, essentially?
Yeah. Did you get any sense of that?
I wouldn't say we really heard anything that specific. Some definitely said they would like to feel more connected, like with other families, but not necessarily like go and like connect with their workers. One did mention like they would like to see like a monthly or like some type of like education. So like, but nothing specific to the workers.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, it was a little bit out of scope, Charles, from the questions that were asked. We could clearly go on and talk about this all day, but we can't. So I'm going to draw it to a close and say thank you very much. Lots of nice comments to you all, and I'll close this session now. So thank you, everyone. Thanks very much.
Thank you. And where can we find the recording again?
It'll be on the ESF website tomorrow or the next day.
All right, wonderful. All right, thank you everyone who came.
Bye. Bye.